This episode, Surviving Global Disorder and Chaos from the Sovereign Drift series, is brought to you by this card studio.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Things feel a little off, a little unmoored.
Rudderless.
Mhm.
That's the word that keeps coming up in all the source material we've been digging through. It's a world that feels rudderless.
That's a perfect word for it. We're sitting here in early 2026, and the world that, we all grew up in, that post-World War II order.
The one built on American hegemony, the U.S. dollar being king, all those liberal institutions we learned about.
Right. The World Bank, the UN, that order isn't just showing cracks anymore.
No, the cracks have become chasms. The foundation is crumbling.
It feels like entire sections of it are just breaking off and falling into the sea. And we really need to spend today talking about what that means for everyone listening.
I think so, because we're living through what political scientists are now calling a geopolitical interregnum.
Interregnum. Okay, that's a term we need to define right at the top. It sounds, a little dramatic, like something out of ancient Rome or medieval history.
And that's not far off, actually. The term comes from Latin, and it literally meant the time between kings. The old king is dead, but the new king hasn't been crowned.
So a power vacuum.
A huge power vacuum. And there's a quote from the Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci that just perfectly frames this whole discussion. He wrote it from a prison cell back in the 1930s, another, deeply chaotic time.
What is the...
He said, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear."
Morbid symptoms, that's incredibly dark. But when I look at the headlines, it also feels unnervingly accurate.
It does. We see these symptoms everywhere, in the economy with persistent inflation, in our politics with rising nationalism, and the way nations just stopped talking to each other constructively.
So today's deep dive, then, is essentially a survival guide for this interregnum.
That's exactly it. We can't afford to just sit around and wait for the new order to magically appear. That could take a decade, maybe more. We have to navigate the chaos now.
Right. So our mission today is to try and map out this new global architecture that's being built, almost frantically to fill this void. We're going to be looking at the big players.
Major architects. The U.S. under the Trump 2.0 administration, China with its grand plans, Russia playing the spoiler, and this incredibly important rising force we're calling the Global South.
And we're going to try to decode the huge economic shift that's underway, the move away from globalization as we knew it.
Which was all about efficiency, lowest cost.
To something new, re-globalization, some call it, or just fragmentation. We want to give you, the listener, whether you're running a company, studying international relations, or just trying to understand the world of framework for making decisions when the risks are this high.
The legal risks, the information risks, they're everywhere.
And we've got a mountain of sources to guide us. This isn't just our opinion. We are pulling directly from the 2025 National Security Strategy of the United States, which is hot off the presses.
We also have China's newly unveiled Global Governance Initiative from September of last year, along with their related concept papers.
We've got strategic reports on Russia's sovereign globalization and their pivot to the world majority, and we're grounding all of this in some really heavy-hitting economic data.
Yes, from the World Bank's Global Economic Prospects 2026 and the Global Value Chain Development Report 2025. So hard numbers to back this all up.
Plus, we have some more unusual source material. I'm going to tease a surprising anecdote we found about a Lego terracotta warrior that was used in a propaganda video.
It sounds bizarre, but it tells you everything you need to know about modern information warfare.
It really does. And on your end, you've teased a really counterintuitive finding from the economic data.
Yeah, the big takeaway is that globalization isn't actually dead, not by a long shot.
So all the headlines are wrong.
They're missing the nuance. It's not dying, it's being rewired. It's being rebuilt for security and resilience, not for pure efficiency. And that fundamental shift changes the price of absolutely everything.
Okay, that is a perfect place to start. Let's dive in. Section 1, the collapse of the old order and this concept of the interregnum. Before we talk about where we're going, we have to be really clear on where we were. What exactly is this old world that Gramsci said is dying?
The term of art is the liberal international order. That was the operating system for the planet from roughly 1945 until a few years ago.
The Bretton Woods system, right? The post-war consensus.
Exactly. And it was really built on three core pillars. You can think of it like a three-legged stool. The first leg was open markets.
Capitalism, free trade.
The whole idea that economic interdependence would lead to peace. You might remember McDonald's peace theory. The idea that no two countries with a McDonald's would ever go to war with each other.
A theory which has been thoroughly disproven at this point.
Thoroughly. So that was the first leg. The second was a set of multilateral institutions. The UN, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, places designed for countries to talk out their problems instead of shooting them out.
The global talking shops.
Right. And the third leg, and this one is absolutely crucial to understand, was the U.S. alliance system. America provided the security guarantee, the nuclear umbrella.
So the U.S. was essentially the bouncer at the global club, making sure nobody started a major fight.
Or, to use a metaphor from the source material, the U.S. was Atlas, holding the world on its shoulders. And the key point of the 2025 National Security Strategy is that Atlas is shrugging. The U.S. is consciously deciding to set that burden down.
So why now? What broke the system? For a long time, it really did feel like Francis Fukuyama's end of history thesis was right. You know, liberal democracy won, free markets won, game over.
Well, the diagnosis in these documents points to a few critical failures. First, and most obviously, was a massive power shift.
From west to east.
And from north to south. The G7 used to basically be the world economy. Today, its share has shrunk dramatically. The economic center of gravity has moved.
And when economic power moves, political power eventually follows.
It always does. The second major failure was that we discovered trade could be weaponized. That optimistic belief that trade prevents war. It turned out to be naive.
It's the opposite in some ways. It creates vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Europe learned this the hard way with Russian gas. The world is learning it now with microchips from Taiwan and critical minerals from China. Integration didn't turn our rivals into friends. It just handed them a lever to pull in a crisis.
And the third failure.
A complete collapse of trust in those institutions.
The UN Security Council being the poster child for this, I assume, it feels like they've been in a state of permanent gridlock for years.
Dysfunctional is putting it mildly. The veto power held by the permanent members means that on any major issue, Ukraine, the Middle East, you name it, it's completely paralyzed. It can't fulfill its primary mission.
So because of that dysfunction, we start to see those morbid symptoms that Gramsci was talking about.
That's where they come from. You see the rise of these sovereigntist movements, this illiberal turn. And it's not just America first.
No, it's everywhere. It's India first, Brazil first, Hungary first. Everyone is pulling back, looking inward.
It's the fragmentation scenario that security experts have been warning about for a decade. Global governance is splitting. It's not one world anymore. It's competing blocks, each with its own rules, its own tech standards, its own sphere of influence.
And the real tragedy of this, the real danger, is that it's happening at the exact moment we face a slate of truly global threats that demand cooperation.
The ultimate mismatch. Climate change, future pandemics, regulating artificial intelligence.
Right. You can't build a wall to stop climate change. The atmosphere doesn't recognize borders.
Carbon doesn't need a visa, and viruses don't pay tariffs. So we have these planet-wide problems, but we're trying to solve them with fragmented nationalist solutions. The very mechanisms we built to handle these things, like the WHO or the Paris Agreement, are being weakened because the underlying trust needed to make them work has just evaporated.
Okay, so if the diagnosis is that the old order is broken and the U.S. is stepping back from its role as Atlas, what is it stepping toward? That brings us to Section 2. The U.S. perspective under Trump 2.0, America First, the sequel.
And this is just fascinating because we have the actual text of the 2025 National Security Strategy, the NSS. And the tone, the entire philosophy, is a radical departure from not just the Biden years, but from the entire post-Cold War consensus.
Radical in what way? Is it just more aggressive language, more tariffs?
It goes much deeper than that. It's a fundamental philosophical break.
Yeah.
The core idea, stated right at front, is a rejection of what the document calls the sprawling architecture of global governance.
Wow, so they're just saying it out loud.
Explicitly. The NSS says that the purpose of foreign policy is no longer to sustain some abstract international order. Its purpose is, and this is a direct quote, domestic restoration.
Domestic restoration. So foreign policy is just a tool for fixing problems at home.
That's it, exactly. It turns the entire logic of foreign policy inward. And the strategy itself is laid out in 3 pillars. The first one is, well, it's really something I've never seen in a document like this.
Go on.
The first pillar is spiritual and cultural health.
Wait, say that again. In a national security document, I'm used to reading about carrier groups and missile defense, not spiritual health.
Me too. But it's pillar 1. The 2025 NSS directly links America's security in the world to its internal cultural and spiritual state. It talks about the need to aim for a new golden age and explicitly calls for the promotion of strong traditional families.
That is a stunning inclusion. What is the threat they're identifying there?
The document names the threat as civilizational erasure.
Civilizational erasure. That's incredibly strong language. What does that mean in practical terms?
It implies a deep-seated fear that the core identity of the nation is dissolving, that a lack of cultural cohesion and traditional values is making the country weak and vulnerable. The argument is that you cannot be strong abroad if you are, in their view, decadent and spiritually hollow at home.
So before America can lead the world again, it has to heal itself.
Heal itself,
Yeah.
restore its traditional identity. It's a very inward-looking, almost isolationist premise for a global superpower. It suggests that the most urgent threat isn't a hypersonic missile from China, but a loss of confidence in America's own culture and history.
That's a profound shift. Okay, so that's the cultural pillar. What's the second one?
The second is more traditional, but the approach is dialed up to 11. It's economic security as national security.
This is where the America First trade policy comes in.
Yes, but with a new emphasis. The document has this great line. It says, quote, "The future belongs to makers,"
Makers. As opposed to what, bankers? Coders?
as opposed to Wall Street financiers, service sector workers, the knowledge economy that we've been told was the future for the last 30 years. This is a call for aggressive reindustrialization,
Bringing the factories back home.
and not just for sentimental reasons. The stated goal is achieving total independence from adversaries, and it names China specifically, for all critical components. This isn't just the de-risking we heard about in the Biden years. This is a clear move towards strategic decoupling in key sectors.
And I imagine energy plays a central role in this vision of a maker economy.
A massive role. The strategy calls for sweeping deregulation to unlock access to domestic natural resources, particularly fossil fuels.
So the drill baby drill ethos is now officially a cornerstone of national security.
According to this document, yes. The argument laid out is that cheap and abundant domestic energy is a strategic weapon. It creates a powerful advantage for American manufacturing. If U.S. factories have cheap energy and factories in Europe or China are paying a premium or a carbon tax,
The U.S. wins.
that's the logic. It's about using America's resource endowment as a geopolitical tool to restore what the document calls the military balance. It directly links the ability to build ships, planes, and tanks to the unhampered extraction of oil and gas.
Okay, so a cultural restoration and an industrial restoration. What's the third pillar?
The third is realignment through peace. This outlines the diplomatic strategy, and it heavily prioritizes what it calls presidential diplomacy over traditional, slow-moving multilateralism.
Meaning the president gets on a plane, sits down with another world leader, and hammers out a deal one-on-one.
That's the model, highly transactional, bilateral, and driven from the top. The NSS talks about the president personally directing peace deals to realign regions and open markets. It's far less concerned with upholding international law or promoting abstract values like human rights.
And more about what's in it for us, getting a good deal for America.
Exactly. It sees the world not as a community of nations bound by law, but as a marketplace of sovereign states all competing for their own advantage.
The sources talk about this as shifting the dial. How is this truly different from the previous administration? I mean, President Biden also kept the China tariffs. He also pushed for reshoring.
It's a difference in degree and I think in conviction. The Biden administration's mantra was invest, align, compete. The align part was crucial, working with allies like the EU, Japan, South Korea.
And this new strategy.
This new strategy is willing to sacrifice alignment for economic advantage. It's pure economic nationalism. The sources note that this administration is willing to bear significant short-term political costs, like really angering Germany or France with new tariffs, if it leads to a long-term strategic gain for U.S. industry.
So if you're an ally, but you run a big trade surplus with the United States, you're a target.
You are absolutely a target. Friend or foe becomes secondary to the numbers on the balance sheet. Berlin is almost as much in the crosshairs as Beijing.
So the U.S. is pulling back, building a fortress, and making it clear that everyone has to pay their own way. That creates a massive power vacuum on the world stage. The Atlas has shrugged, as you said. What is China doing to rush into that empty space? That's our Section 3.
And they are not just rushing in. They're rolling out a completely alternative operating system for the world. In September of 2025, they officially bundled their various ideas into one grand strategy. the Global Governance Initiative, or GGI.
The master plan.
It really is. And the core principle, the central branding of this whole thing, is a concept they call true multilateralism.
True multilateralism. That sounds a little redundant. What does that even mean?
Well, it's a very clever piece of rhetorical jujitsu. You see, when the US or Europe says multilateralism, they mean everyone gathering to follow the rules-based order that was written in Washington and Brussels in 1945.
The liberal international order we were just talking about.
Right. When China says true multilateralism, they mean a system that respects civilizational diversity.
Okay, you're going to have to translate that for me. What is civilizational diversity in this context?
It's a polite way of saying that Western values are not universal values. The idea that all countries should move toward democracy and protect individual human rights is, in their view, just a Western cultural preference.
Ah, I see. So every civilization should be free to govern itself according to its own traditions without outside interference.
You've got it. It's a shield for autocracy. It's a doctrine of absolute sovereignty. Don't lecture us about our treatment of Uyghurs or our policies in Hong Kong, and we won't lecture you about your domestic problems.
And this GGI, this master plan, is built on a few sub-initiatives, right?
Yes, it's a trinity of initiatives that they've been pushing for a few years, now all brought under one roof. The first is the Global Security Initiative, the GSI. This champions the idea of indivisible security.
That phrase sounds very familiar. It's what Russia always uses.
And that's not an accident. It's a direct nod to Moscow's concerns. The concept is that one country's security actions, say Ukraine wanted to join NATO, should not be allowed if it makes another country, Russia, feel insecure. It's a veto for great powers over their neighbors' choices.
And it also opposes things like sanctions, right?
It explicitly opposes unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction. It's basically an attempt to build an anti-sanctions coalition. It reframes sanctions not as a tool for enforcing international law, but as a form of Western economic bullying.
Okay, what's the second part of the trinity?
The second is the Global Development Initiative, or GDI. This is China's economic pitch to the world. And it's very simple. It focuses entirely on poverty alleviation, infrastructure, and economic growth.
And it consciously leaves out things like, what? Good governance, human rights, anti-corruption measures?
It's all of it. The implicit message is political rights are a luxury. Let's focus on economic rights first. Have you eaten today? Do you have a paved road? It's a very appealing message in many parts of the developing world.
And the third initiative?
The Global Civilization Initiative. This is the cultural component. It pushes for equal-footed exchanges between civilizations and directly attacks the idea that any one model is superior. It's essentially cultural relativism as a foreign policy doctrine.
Which brings us to the Lego anecdote. I've been waiting for this. How on earth do Lego bricks fit into China's grand geopolitical strategy?
It's a perfect example of their new wolf warrior soft power tactics. One of the sources we reviewed analyzed a viral video put out by Xinhua, China's main state news agency. The video was called Once Upon a Virus.
Okay.
And it was an animated short film made entirely with Lego-like figures. It depicts a debate between a Lego terracotta warrior and a Lego Statue of Liberty.
You're not kidding. A Lego debate.
A Lego debate. The terracotta warrior is calmly trying to warn the Statue of Liberty about a new virus, and the Statue of Liberty just responds with denial, arrogance, hypocrisy, dismisses the warnings, and then later blames the warrior when things go wrong.
Wow. That's not subtle.
Not at all. But it's incredibly effective at illustrating their new information strategy. They are using Western cultural forms, animation, memes, toys, to mock the West and promote their own narrative. The message is simple. China was responsible. The West was incompetent and hypocritical.
So they're not just building bridges and ports anymore. They're building narratives, and they're doing it by trolling the United States using American toys.
Exactly. But we can't forget, they are also still building the physical infrastructure. The economic leverage is the foundation of all of this. The Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, and their own development bank, the AIIB.
The parallel system.
It's a complete parallel system. They are building the world's new plumbing, the ports, the railways, the 5G networks, and they're making sure it all runs on Chinese standards and technology. That gives them immense long-term power.
Okay, so we have the U.S. looking inward, building Fortress America. We have China building an entire alternative world order. Where does that leave Russia? Are they just, China's junior partner, a big gas station with nukes? That's Section 4.
That is the existential question for Moscow right now. For years, their grand strategy was something they called sovereign globalization.
Sovereign globalization. Break that down for us. It sounds like a contradiction in terms.
It does, but the logic was, in a way, the autocratic dream, to have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
Russia wanted all the benefits of being part of the global economy, the wealth from energy sales, access to Western technology, the ability for oligarchs to buy property in London.
But without any of the political strings attached.
Exactly, while maintaining absolute iron-fisted political control at home. The strategy involved reducing foreign debt, limiting foreign ownership in key sectors, but most importantly, using their energy exports to Europe as a political lever.
The energy weapon.
They believed that by making Europe, especially Germany, dependent on cheap Russian gas, they could effectively paralyze any unified European response to Russian aggression in its near abroad.
A strategy that we now know failed spectacularly.
It completely blew up in their face. It was predicated on two things: consistently high oil and gas prices and a politically divided and weak Europe. The sanctions after 2014, and especially the massive waves after the 2022 invasion, shattered that model. Russia was cut off from the West and forced into what the reports call defensive retrenchment.
So they were forced to pivot.
They had no other choice. And they pivoted hard to what they now call the world majority.
I've been seeing that term pop up more and more. Is that just a new name for the global south or the developing world?
It is, but the branding is much more assertive, much more political. Russia is attempting to reframe its position. It's no longer an outcast from the West. In this new narrative, it's the revolutionary leader of the global anti-colonial movement.
Which is, breathtakingly ironic given that their war in Ukraine is a textbook example of a colonial war of conquest.
The irony is lost on no one outside of their propaganda bubble. But the strategy is to rally this world majority against what they frame as Western neocolonialism. They use forums like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SQ, as alternatives to the G7 and NATO.
And the big push is de-dollarization, right?
That's the holy grail for them, creating alternative financial payment systems that operate outside the control of the U.S. Treasury Department. If they can trade with India or Brazil without touching the dollar, then U.S. sanctions lose most of their bite.
But is this pivot working? What's the major risk for Russia in this new strategy?
The risk is enormous, and the source material is very clear on this. The danger is that Russia simply becomes a junior partner, a vassal state, really, to China.
They escape one sphere of influence only to fall into another.
Precisely. Their whole strategy was sovereign globalization. The goal was sovereignty. But now, they're swapping a complex interdependence with Europe for a simple, stark dependence on China.
You can see that with the energy sales, can't you?
It's crystal clear. Look at the negotiations for the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. Beijing holds all the cards. They can dictate the price, the terms, everything. If China decides to buy less gas tomorrow, the Russian economy goes into a tailspin. Moscow is rapidly becoming a resource colony for Beijing, which is the exact loss of sovereignty they claim to be fighting against.
So they fled the Western cage and walked right into the dragon's den.
A very well-put analogy. They are politically aligned against the U.S., but in the economic relationship, there is no question who is the senior partner.
Let's move on to Section 5 then. If the U.S. is going it alone and Russia and China are in this uneasy partnership, where on earth does that leave Europe?
It leaves Europe in a terrible bind.
Yeah.
Squeezed. They are caught in a geopolitical vice.
Between the U.S. on one side and China on the other.
Exactly. On one side, they face U.S. protectionism. The Trump tariffs don't just apply to adversaries, they apply to allies too, as we've discussed. On the other side, they face China's state-subsidized capitalism, which is undercutting European industries.
A rock and a very hard place. So what's their strategy to get out of this squeeze?
They're trying to forge a third way to become a geopolitical power in their own right. Their big economic play is the Global Gateway Initiative.
Right. This is the EU's answer to China's Belt and Road.
It is. It's a 300 billion euro infrastructure plan, primarily focused on places like Africa, and with a heavy emphasis on green energy and digital connectivity. They're trying to offer a different value proposition to developing countries.
What's the pitch?
The pitch is basically, we'll help you build your infrastructure too, but our projects come with transparency, high labor standards, environmental protection, and no hidden debt traps.
But at the same time, Europe is also remilitarizing at a speed we haven't seen in decades.
A massive historic shift. The sources highlight Germany deploying what they're calling Panzer Brigade 45 to Lithuania.
Okay, explain the significance of that for people who don't follow European defense closely.
This is monumental. It is a permanent deployment of a heavy German combat brigade, thousands of soldiers and tanks, on NATO's eastern flank. For Germany, a country that has been defined by pacifism for 80 years because of its history, This was politically unthinkable just 5 years ago.
It's a signal that they believe a major conventional war in Europe is a real possibility.
And that they can no longer solely rely on the U.S. to be there to fight it. It's a sign of deep strategic anxiety.
But this leads to their classic dilemma, doesn't it? The guns versus butter problem.
Always. European nations have built these incredibly generous welfare states. The butter, universal health care, robust pensions, strong social safety nets. Now suddenly they need a lot more guns. And their economies are sluggish.
So you can't easily afford both.
You can't. And that is the central political challenge for every European leader right now. How do you convince your population to accept cuts to the butter they've come to expect in order to pay for the guns you desperately need? It's a recipe for severe domestic political turmoil.
Now, what about the rest of the world? We've talked about the big powers, but most countries aren't superpowers. The sources mention something called the Accra Reset. What's that about?
This is one of the most important and I think underreported trends. The middle powers, countries like Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, major African nations like Nigeria and South Africa, they are refusing to be pawns in this new great power competition.
They're not picking a side.
They are actively refusing to pick a side. They're hedging. They're playing all sides against each other to maximize their own benefit. And the Accra Reset is a term from one of the reports that describes a new demand coming from these nations.
A demand for what?
A new model of partnership. They are tired of the old models. They don't want traditional foreign aid from the West, which they see as charity with political strings attached, and they're wary of the debt trap model from China.
So what do they want instead?
They want business. They want investment. They want technology transfer. The mindset is, don't come here and give us a handout. Come here and build a factory. Don't just extract our raw materials. Help us build the processing plant so we can move up the value chain.
They want to be partners, not dependents.
Exactly. And to achieve this, they are embracing a new form of diplomacy, minilateralism.
Minilateralism, as opposed to multilateralism.
Right. The era of getting all 193 members of the UN to agree on anything is over. That's multilateralism, and it's too big and slow. The new trend is small, agile coalitions of the willing formed to solve a specific problem.
Give me an example.
AUKUS Australia, the UK, and the US coming together to build nuclear submarines. That's a minilateral group.
Okay.
The Quad India, the US, Japan, Australia, cooperating on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific.
So it's like ditching the giant, slow-moving cruise ship of the UN for a fleet of nimble speedboats.
Speedboats with very specific missions, and everyone is forming them. It's the new logic of global diplomacy.
Let's shift gears and get into the engine room of all this change. Section 6, the economic engine. You said at the top that globalization isn't dead, but it's being rewired. Unpack that for us.
The fundamental logic of the global economy has done a 180-degree turn. For the last 30 years, the driving principle was efficiency. The goal was to produce everything at the absolute lowest possible cost.
The just-in-time supply chain model.
That was the gospel. If you could save 2 cents per unit by sourcing a tiny component from a single factory in a remote province of China, you did it. You built your entire global production system on the assumption that the ship would always arrive on time.
And then the pandemic happened, and the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal, and wars broke out.
And suddenly, just in time, looked incredibly fragile. It became just too late. So the new logic, the new gospel, is security and resilience.
Right.
We have moved from just in time to just in case.
Just in case. What does that look like in practice?
In practice, it means companies are intentionally building redundancy and slack back into the system. They're holding much larger inventories. They're diversifying their suppliers, making sure they have a backup for every critical part.
And they're moving production closer to home, right? Nearshoring or friendshoring?
Yes. A company might move a factory from China to Mexico, not because Mexico's cheaper, in many cases it isn't, but because it's closer, it's in the same time zones, and it's in a friendly political bloc. The extra cost is seen as an insurance premium against geopolitical shocks.
So this is what reglobalization actually means.
This is it. Trade itself isn't vanishing. In fact, the data in the World Bank report shows that South trade between developing nations is booming. Trade in digital services is exploding, but the trade in physical goods is reorganizing itself around these geopolitical fault lines.
You trade sensitive, high-tech goods with your friends, and maybe less critical stuff with your rivals.
That's the emerging model. And there are new policies that are accelerating this. One of the biggest, which went fully into effect on January 1st of this year, 2026, is the EU CBAM.
The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's basically a carbon tax on imports.
That's a good way to think about it. Let's walk through how it works. Imagine you run a steel company in a country that doesn't price carbon, say India. You use a lot of coal to run your furnaces, making your steel cheap, but carbon intensive.
Okay.
You try to export that steel to Germany. When it hits the border, an EU customs official says, hold on, our German steelmakers have to pay a high price for their carbon emissions under our emissions trading system. To make it a fair competition, you have to pay an equivalent price on the carbon embedded in your imported steel.
So basically forces the rest of the world to adopt European-style green standards or else pay a steep tax.
It creates a massive incentive to decarbonize your manufacturing if you want to sell to the world's largest single market. But it's also a huge source of international tension. The global south, Russia, China, they see this as green protectionism. Their argument is, you in the West got rich by burning coal for 150 years with no penalty. Now that you're rich, you're kicking away the ladder and taxing us for trying to do the same thing to develop our economies.
Speaking of protectionism, the sources talk a lot about the China Inc. challenge.
This is a core complaint from both the US and the EU. The line between a private company in China and the Chinese state has become almost non-existent. The reports focus on sectors like shipbuilding and maritime logistics.
What's the issue there?
The Chinese government funnels colossal subsidies to its state-owned enterprises in these sectors. They can underbid any competitor because they don't really have to make a profit. Their goal is market share and strategic control, not quarterly returns.
It's not a fair fight when a private company in Germany has to compete against the entire treasury of the People's Republic of China.
It's not. And the response from the West is what you'd expect. More tariffs, and now our own subsidies. We are in a global subsidy war. We are re-embracing industrial policy, with governments in Washington and Brussels actively picking winners and losers to compete with China.
And this fragmentation is also happening in the digital world, isn't it? The idea of a splinter net.
It's well underway. We are seeing a rapid divergence in standards for critical future technologies. Artificial intelligence, 6G communications, data privacy. The world is splitting into a US-EU data block and a China-Russia data block.
And the data can't easily cross between them.
Right, and this has huge implications. One of the reports mentions Volkswagen hiring 6,000 software engineers.
6,000? That's the size of a major tech company. Why are they doing that? Why not just buy the software from a supplier?
Because of this fragmentation. A modern car is basically a computer on wheels, constantly gathering and transmitting data. VW realized they can't rely on a global supplier for the car's software brain anymore. If they use American code, the car might face restrictions in China. If they use Chinese code, it could be banned from the US market on national security grounds.
So they have to own the entire tech stack themselves, vertical integration as a survival strategy.
It's the only way to navigate the regulatory minefield of the splinter net.
Which brings us to the big so what section. Section 7, consequences, risks, and our survival guide. Looking at this whole landscape in 2026, what are the immediate risks that keep you up at night?
In the short to medium term, it's the high risk of what the strategists call localized disruptions with global implications.
A crisis in the Taiwan Strait, for example.
That's the nightmare scenario everyone worries about. But it could also be a flare-up in the Middle East, a conflict in the South China Sea, or a cyber attack that takes down a major financial system. In this fragile, fragmented world, a small fire can spread globally very, very quickly.
And what about the economic risks?
The big one is persistent, structural inflation.
Because the new just-in-case world is just more expensive to run.
Exactly. Efficiency was cheap. Resilience is expensive. Building that second factory in Mexico costs money.
Yeah.
Holding 6 months of extra inventory costs money. The tariffs that are going up everywhere, that cost is passed on to you, the consumer. The era of 2% inflation being the norm might be over for the foreseeable future.
And the social risks. You mentioned the NSS rhetoric about civilizational erasure.
That kind of rhetoric isn't just talk, it translates directly into policy. We're seeing it in much stricter migration policies across the Western world. The sources mention the expansion of ICE in the US, the move toward purely merit-based immigration systems. It's a reflection of societies becoming more insular, more suspicious of outsiders.
And looking out further, what are the long-term consequences of this new order?
I see two major ones. The first is what I'd call the green divide. You have the West, led by the EU, pushing aggressively on climate goals with policies like CBAM. On the other side, you have the global South, China, and Russia, who are prioritizing cheap energy for economic development and security. This is a fundamental philosophical clash over the future of the planet's economy.
And the second long-term consequence.
a dangerous widening of inequality. There's a growing gap between the countries, companies, and individuals who have the skills and capital to thrive in this new digital, green, and fragmented economy, and those who are left behind, stuck in the old economy of carbon-intensive manufacturing.
So we promised a survival guide. Let's distill this all down into some actionable lessons for our listeners. Let's start with governments. If you're a prime minister or a diplomat listening to this, what's the key takeaway?
For governments, the lesson is stark. You are on your own in a way you haven't been for 80 years. The global policeman is off the beat. You cannot assume the U.S. will ride to the rescue just because it's the right thing to do. You have to be self-reliant. You must build those minilateral coalitions with like-minded countries, and you must diversify your partnerships. Don't put all your strategic eggs in the Washington basket or the Beijing basket. Be nimble.
Okay, now for businesses, what if I'm a CEO or an entrepreneur?
If you're in business, geopolitical due diligence is no longer a niche concern. It is as vital as financial due diligence. You practically need a foreign minister on your executive team. You have to actively hedge against currency fluctuations and sudden sanctions. You absolutely must diversify your markets. The biggest growth is going to come from the global south, not from the saturated markets of the west or the risky market in China. And you need to map your supply chain down to the raw material level. Do you know where the lithium in your batteries really comes from? You need to.
And finally, for our citizens, for the regular person trying to make sense of all this.
For citizens, the most important skill is critical thinking. We talked about that Lego propaganda video. You are the target of sophisticated information warfare every single day, designed to make you angry, cynical, and divided. You have to be aware of it and question the narratives you're being fed. And on a practical economic level, you need to understand that the era of unbelievably cheap, disposable goods produced by globalized supply chains is probably coming to an end. The price of national sovereignty and security is, unfortunately, higher prices at the store.
You pay for that resilience at the checkout counter.
That's the trade-off we're all making, whether we realize it or not. Your new smartphone costs more because we want to make sure the chips inside it aren't being made somewhere that could cut us off tomorrow.
We are coming to the end of our deep dive. We've mapped this chaotic interregnum. We've seen the U.S. turning inward to restore itself, China rolling out a new operating system for the world, Russia playing the role of disruptor, and the rest of the world hedging its bets.
It's not a one world order anymore. It's a multi-order world. The dream of a single, unified global system is, for now, gone.
And I want to leave our listeners with a final thought, something to mull over. The sources remind us that this year, 2026, marks the 250th anniversary of American independence.
A quarter of a millennium. That's a long, successful run for any political experiment.
It is, and the United States began as a very fragile experiment. It wasn't born a superpower, it was a startup on the edge of the world. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Is the chaos we're seeing today the end of the American experiment's global phase, a great power in decline? Or is this a painful but necessary restructuring? Is the U.S. just remodeling the house to be more sustainable for the next 250 years, or is the foundation itself cracking?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. And I'll leave you with one more to think about, a more personal one. If the world is splitting into these digital blocks and trade fortresses, if your car's software reports back to servers in Beijing and your phone's data lives on servers in California, where does your data and your loyalty actually reside? Are you still a citizen of a country, or are you becoming a user on a platform?
Oof. Citizen or user. That is a heavy thought to end on. Thank you, as always, for this incredible deep dive.
It was a pleasure. A lot to think about.
For all of you listening, stay curious, stay critical, and we'll see you next time.